Hello friends, today we will discuss an important article which has come in the Hindu newspaper. The article is written by Happymon Jacob, who is an expert in international affairs, and the article is basically in context of India's choices, that whether it should go for domestic development or it should pursue its independent foreign policy so that it becomes a global heft power in the international politics arena. If you want to download this slide, the link can be found in the description box. If you want to listen to this video in Hindi, then you can go to our another channel, that is prepezee. So let us discuss this article. Basically, the focus is that whether India should be focusing on the domestic issues first or it should be fighting for the global heft in the international foreign policy. So basically, there are two narratives. So we will be discussing these two narratives. The first narrative is hyper-nationalist narrative, which says that India should aspire to be a great power in international politics. It says that India is growing and it should focus its resources on becoming more powerful in the international relations. On the other hand, there is the second narrative, that is deeply pessimistic narrative. This narrative says that rather than spending or using its resources in international policy arena, we should be focusing more on the domestic development so that we can uplift the poverty, the millions of people who are there who are below the poverty line, and we should improve our governance so that we can again move towards the direction of better foreign policy, but only after we have developed internally first. So now the author, he gives his outcome, that is his own opinion first. He says that this is actually a false binary. We cannot have any single choice. We need to be focusing on both of these issues at one time. But secondly, the major thing he says that both of these are actually interdependent. We cannot have domestic development without pursuing independent power and global power, and we cannot pursue global power without having international development. So we should be focusing our resources in optimum manner so that we can achieve both of these outcomes simultaneously, so that we can achieve our destiny of the 1.4 billion people we have, and secondly, we can define the future of the world in important ways. So this is what his outcome is, his reason is, his opinion is, and let us now discuss that how he says that we can achieve both of these things. So first of all, the author is talking about the economic heft, economic power, which is the precursor to international heft. That is, if you want to be a global power, you should first try to become the economic power. And as your economic power increases, so will your international power. So for example, he makes the comparison between India before 1991 and India of today. So before LPG reforms were undertaken, that is before 1991, India's forex reserves, they had fallen to a miserable amount of $5.8 billion. The country was humiliated when it had to ship the gold reserves so that it can have some kind of loan so that it can cover its imports for a few weeks. Its GDP was very low, that is hardly $270 billion at that time. Its population was suffering from poverty. Almost 50% of people out of the 84 crore people of the population which we were having at that time, almost 50% of the people, they were below poverty line. Apart from that, if we talk about the strategic affairs, that is what was our standing in the international arena, it was not very good at that time. We were having clashes with Pakistan very frequently. We were also at the risk of having a nuclear war, and this was actually the concern of all major powers at that time. Therefore, the American officials, they used to visit our country, they used to go to Pakistan, and ultimately they used to keep a watch on the two countries and their nuclear arsenals, that whether the countries are not getting involved in some kind of war, and which will lead to harm and which will lead to disaster for the world itself. Secondly, our trusted partner Soviet Union was gone. It was actually disintegrated into multiple countries. Our relations with US, they were very in fact poor, and we were not having any strategic heft as of we can say in the international arena. In fact, even in domestic also security concerns were there, because Kashmir, we see that the violence was on its peak, and the country was facing security concerns in the internal sector also. Now let's compare this thing to the country of today, that is after LPG reforms and now in 2023. So we can see that now forex reserves are at a very comfortable $600 billion and they are increasing. We are still behind China, but yes, we have come a considerable length from that times. Then again, our GDP is $4 trillion, the nominal GDP, and India is the fifth largest economy in the world. We are on the road to becoming the second largest economy in some years when we'll cross US also at some point of time. India is having one of the largest militaries in the world. And if we talk about the strategic heft, that is the countries, how do they view us? Then we can safely say that India is now a global pivot. That is, in fact, we are having a very good relations with Western nations like US and France. That is visible from the recent visit of our Prime Minister to the two countries. Secondly, we see that even if we talk about our concerns, Pakistan fight or war is no longer our concern. Now our concern is China, which is also the concern of US. So we can say yes in terms of, although we can say that there are fears of war, but then again we are not concerned about Pakistan's capabilities. It is actually a disaster nowadays, at least an economic disaster. But then again, yes, we do not want that because of nuclear capabilities. But then again, India is now a pole in international relations, which is visible from two different facts. The first is, as we can see, that India is having good relations with the Western countries, that is US and France. Similarly, even Russia, it quotes India and it in fact still counts India as its trusted partner. So that we can safely say that India is now actually a country which is having relations with both of these poles, the Western and Eastern countries. Secondly, if we talk about the developed countries of the North and the South countries, that is developing countries of the South, we are actually a mediator between the two. Why? Because we are the voice of developing countries, but then if we want to talk to the developing countries, then again they listen to us, and that is why the North, that is developed countries, they value us. They know that yes, if we want to negotiate with the developing countries, then India is their unspoken leader. So we are a very major pole nowadays, and if there is one country which is being trusted to have some kind of mediation between the Ukraine and Russia in their war, that country is actually India nowadays. So from this it is visible that we are playing both the sides, both the poles of international global foreign policy with great deftness and with great elan. So therefore our international standing has increased to a very great extent. But then again, does this mean that if GDP and military power or military strength is there, does that mean that it automatically translates to the development of the people? Not so. Why? Because we'll understand this with the help of the example of Bangladesh. See, if we talk about Bangladesh, its GDP is very less as compared to India. Even if we talk about military, India is one of the largest militaries and Bangladesh is hardly 40th in terms of the military power. But then if we talk about the per capita GDP, what is per capita GDP? That is the GDP if it is divided by population. Then what does it come to? For Bangladesh, it is 2227. That is more than $2,200. But for India, it is less than 1947 if we take the data of 2021. So therefore, per capita GDP, which we can say that it actually indicates the level of development for an average person, India is having lesser than Bangladesh. But GDP and military capabilities, India is having far more than Bangladesh. Therefore, we can say that both of them, these two are not related at all. And yet, we can say that now, if we talk about that, what are the effects? What is the reason why let's say that Indian foreign policy is getting impacted by multiple factors? See, there are different issues with the Indian foreign policy. First of all, we have domestic concerns. Our domestic concerns are our priority. So first of all, we need to reduce poverty. Despite saying that multidimensional poverty, it has halved and we are doing well, still we see that poverty is still there. And we need to see to it that even the basic concerns like food, sometimes we face issues in that also. Our stockpiles sometimes they do not seem enough. The inflation, for example, right now we can see that there is a inflation in tomato prices, inflation is high. So despite giving so many efforts to improvement in the economy and to improve the condition of people, we do not see that happening in such a direct mode. There is some improvement, but then again we need to do more. Second, infrastructure and governance, if we talk about it, yes, we have done well. If we talk about ease of doing business also, it has improved in the country. But yes, in fact, corruption still remains. So therefore we can say that yeah, starting a business without a bribe, it is not very easy, and therefore the country needs to do more. And then the societal divides, they have increased. The religious divide has increased, caste divides have increased, the regions are fighting between each other, and ethnic clashes which are visible in the Manipur violence, they are there, they have increased to such an extent that the country has had to protest in one voice against the Manipur violence and what happened to the two ladies out there when a mob went violent and it actually desecrated everything, and we saw that it behaved like animals to the two ladies. So therefore societal divides still exist, and in the face of such divides, in the face of such domestic concerns, it is very difficult for the political spectrum to focus on the foreign policy. The first priority is always domestic development. Only then the foreign policy comes into view. So basically, if we see, again there would be an argument. The argument says that if we talk about this foreign policy, then foreign policy is actually a prerogative of the bureaucrats. That is the diplomatic community we have, the ambassadors who are sitting there, the foreign service officials who are working every day. But then here, see, there is a caveat here. The foreign service officials, they are bureaucrats. And bureaucrats are generally, we see that in India, the bureaucrats are risk averse. This is because in India, or let's say majorly we see in major parts of the world, we see that if any person, if any bureaucrat is taking risk, then they are prone to be seen as corrupt. For example, let's take the example of banking sector also. If an MD of a bank, they do debt write-off, that is they say that now the loan we have written off this kind of loan, then there is a strong possibility that it will be alleged that this was done because a bribe was paid to the MD by the respective business. So similarly here also, the bureaucrats, they are risk averse. They look at the precedents, that is whatever happened in the past, and then accordingly they take their positions. They are not taking any risk, they are not changing the direction. They are only following the directions which are given by the political spectrum. And that is not wrong also, because that is why we have representatives. But then again, that simply means that we cannot leave our policy on autopilot. We cannot just entrust our foreign policy to the diplomats. The political will must be there so that the direction is given by the leaders, that is the Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister, and then later on it is being followed up by the diplomatic community. Another major issue is the lack of resources. Lack of resources means that we are spending too less resources on the foreign policy. The Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs, it said that allocation which is being made to Ministry of External Affairs is so less in India. It is hardly 0.44% of government's overall budget. But if we talk about US expenditure on US aid, that is the grants it is granting to other countries, it is $65 billion. So you can understand that how far behind we are from US and other countries like that. So if India needs to grow, if India wants to achieve its aspirations, then the allocation should be in consonance. Then only we can go on and achieve our role in international community. And why do we need such global heft? Many of the people will point out, what is the need of having a global heft? No, it is there. It is required for domestic development also. How? See, Happymon Jacob in this article, he says that if we are not looking at our global international foreign policy standing, then that is a strategic blunder we are making. Why? Because if you are not a rule maker, you are a rule follower or a rule taker. If you are not sitting at the high table and making the rules, then someone else will make those rules for you. And then you will have to follow it, whatever rules are being made. For example, and India has never done that. For example, if we talk about the non-proliferation, India, it was pressured so much that you have to sign NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, or Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, so that you won't be making nuclear bombs anymore. If you don't do that, we will place sanctions, and sanctions were placed on India in 1974 also, in 1998 also, when we exploded nuclear bombs. But India never bent to these pressures. Why? Because it knew that it was living in a tough neighborhood. It had to face Pakistan and China multiple times. So it knew that if it did not work on deterrence and it was not having nuclear capability to make a bomb, then again it would face issues tomorrow when there is another war with Pakistan or with China, and nobody will come to Indian rescue. We have seen that multiple times in Kargil, or in 1971 or in 1962 or 65. Whenever India fought any wars, we were almost isolated. Whatever support we received, that was in retaliation to the superpower politics. That is, one pole was fighting the other pole. But India was alone. It was fighting the wars on its own capability. But India was responsible enough to say that we will be a non-proliferating power. We will not share the technology of nuclear bomb with other countries, unlike Pakistan, which has shared this technology with North Korea and other countries. So India said that no, we will be responsible, and that was later on recognized and respected the world over, when the world countries like France and US, they now recognize even Japan, which has been the only country which has bore the brunt of nuclear weapon, and it is very much still afraid to be a partner to any country which is having nuclear heft. So now Japan is in relations with India, showing to it that it trusts that India will never use its nuclear bombs without a strong reason. We are following the no first use doctrine. So in non-proliferation, we stood for ourselves. Similarly, climate change, CBDR, we follow the principle of CBDR-RC, that is common but differentiated responsibility, respective capabilities. What does this mean? See, we say to it that yes, why the climate change is happening? Global warming is increasing because of carbon emissions. And who has historically led more emissions? It is the Western countries who have developed at the expense of developing countries. So therefore, it is the responsibility of Western countries to decrease the emissions and help the developing countries in decreasing their emissions by providing them finance as well as technology. But they are not doing it. Western countries, they are backtracking from their promises. So again, now India is again pushing them to the principle of CBDR, that common but differentiated responsibility. We are pushing them again and again that no, you have historical responsibility and you have to do it. We understand that also we will have to contribute also to some extent, but you will be the leader here. If you want to be the leader of the world, then you have to be the leader when it comes to the testing times also. So CBDR policy we are following. If we talk about global trade also, see, some years ago when WTO negotiations were happening on the farm subsidies, India was tormented by the Western countries. It was continuously targeted, saying that only one country is preventing a consensus from being reached. But India never gave up its position. India never withdrew from its position. It said that the public distribution system, PDS system which we have, we will continue with it. We will stockpile the grains if necessary, because we are still facing poverty. You developed countries, you have developed. You don't need any more stockpiling. But we do. Our population is large and food stocks are lesser. And we don't want a repeat of historical blunders and famines when when a large section of population had died. So we stuck to our stand, and ultimately a waiver was given that till the time this a consensus is not reached, there would be no stock limits on India and other countries. So definitely we have stuck to our stands. We have been the rule maker. We have not bent over backwards to just please the Western countries. That is a very good thing and we need to continue it. Debt restructuring, for example, Sri Lanka, it is an economic crisis. What is debt restructuring? If I have taken a loan, then and if I am unable to pay it as of now, then either you give me a moratorium, that is you give me some time before I start paying it again, 1 or 2 years let's say, or you decrease the amount of EMI to such an amount which I am able to pay. If I was paying let's say 10,000 rupees, then you decrease it to 5,000 rupees because I am unable to pay this 10,000. So this is called debt restructuring. So there is again a need for basically a global heft requirement is there so that India can set the rules and it can also look at the interest of the developing countries, which have making India as a developing countries leader, basically without an unspoken leader, obviously. So the conclusion on the basis of this discussion is that yes, we need to increase our international standing, but then we also cannot neglect our domestic priorities or domestic development. We have to look at both and we need to develop both at the same time. That is the requirement. So if you like this article, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.